Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Let me get this set. Hey, welcome to the weekly home workshop. This is your host, Terry Taylor. On this week's episode, we're going to be looking at closing day, what actually happens at the closing table. So, in episode 22, we took a look at the final walkthrough. Now we've reached the moment everyone's been working towards, and that's the closing day. But what actually happens at closing? What are you signing? When does the money move? And probably the buyer's favorite question, when do you actually get the keys? So again, this is the weekly home workshop. Every Wednesday at 12:15, we take about 15 minutes during lunch break to make real estate a little easier to understand. So today we've made it here. We've already talked about like inspections, appraisal, repairs. Last week we covered the final walkthrough. Now it's time for that closing day. And you've probably heard people say in the past, hey, we're closing on Friday, or I close on my home tomorrow. But what does closing actually mean? What happens when you sit down at that table? And excuse me, here's the important question. Does signing your documents automatically mean the house is yours? We're going to talk about it. Let's still go ahead and start by taking a look at, we'll go ahead and pull up segment 1. And we're going to talk about what it actually is. What is a closing? So the closing process is where the transaction moves towards its legal and final completion. For the buyer, this generally means signing, necessary documents. For the seller, they're also signing some necessary documents. In South Carolina, a real estate closing is typically handled by a licensed attorney. So it is kind of that signing the paperwork type process. Whenever you're getting the paperwork done, you're finally at the closing table. You've already scheduled the time with the attorney. You need to get on the attorney's calendar, in fact. And again, if you're working with a real estate agent, the real estate agent is going to help you with all of that kind of stuff. By now, the attorney has already gotten all of your pertinent information. They know how you want to either receive funds if you're if you're selling. They probably at this point already told you some other financial things that need to be taken care of. So closing, really, it isn't just signing papers. It is the legal and financial completion of your real estate transaction. So it's legal and financial. So you're dealing with a lender and an attorney. You're dealing with getting records documented. And again, it's a kind of a finalization of the process. So what are you actually signing? Let's look at segment 2. Excuse me 1 second. Let's take a look at segment 2. What is it you're actually signing? In most cases, you're doing your mortgage, your deed or your trust, the promissory notes, the loan disclosures, really the settlement and closing statements. Sometimes you're filling out some information that's going to go to the IRS for tax purposes. There may be other legal binding documents that need to be signed, and you're going to be signing those as well. So the closing table isn't just going to pick up the keys. This is finalizing all the work that's been done. Usually closings, once you go under contract, they can be anywhere from the typical time frame, anywhere from 30 to 45 days. Some could take a little bit longer. And again, depending on the complexity of your particular deal, that'll kind of dictate what the paperwork signing looks like. Also, please note, most of the time, the buyer's going to do a whole lot of the signing. So make sure your fingers are nice and limber. Be ready to sign a lot of paperwork. I know in some states they are going to more digital type stuff as far as digital signings. But here in South Carolina, all the closings we've been to is usually a stack of papers. And the sellers usually don't have to sign as much as the buyers will. But sellers do have to sign documents as well. Now, during COVID, there was an interesting thing that happened. Pre-COVID, oftentimes you'd have the buyer and the seller sitting right across from each other at the closing table. Once COVID hit, for precautionary measures, they would normally separate. So You could be in the same building, but one buyers might be in one conference room, sellers might be in the other one, everybody masked up. And since then, they've still kind of adopted that rule. You can still, and there's a hybrid that kind of goes on. So you'll see it where both are in there sometimes. Sometimes sellers might be moving out of state and they may sign their documents early and you may never meet the sellers if you're the buyer. But again, don't be intimidated. There is a stack of paperwork. But again, one other thing that you shouldn't do, don't just blindly sign either. If you don't understand something, ask the closing attorney, okay? That's one reason they're there. The closing attorney knows all of this legal jargon. They know what signing documents, what state that puts you in, and what agreement it is you're signing. So please, if there's a question, be sure to ask your closing attorney. But in the end, just, don't be afraid of the paperwork. There's going to be a lot to sign. If you have any questions, be sure to ask questions at that time. Let's jump on over to segment 3. Next question you might be asking is, hey, where does all the money go? So let's pull up segment 3 right quick and take a look at where all this money goes. So this is where the buyers and sellers sometimes look at the closing statement and say, hey, wait a minute, what is all of this? Because once you get a closing statement, a settlement statement, there's going to be an itemization. They're going to show debits and credits. You'll usually have the buyers on one side of the ledger, sellers on the other side, and there's a whole lot of numbers going back and forth. So the closing process accounts for the money associated with the transaction, right? So depending on the deal, it can include things like the purchase funds, loan proceeds, earnest money credits, closing costs. A whole bunch of things can be on that closing statement. And you do want to make sure you take a good look at that final settlement statement. Now, in most cases, you will have had that settlement statement or at least a draft of it sent to you prior to closing. And typically what we do with our clients, once we get a draft of the settlement statement, we'll go over that with them. By that time, the lender has probably already gone over a lot of documents with them as well. And you just want to make sure the things that were agreed to in the contract are showing up on the settlement statement, whether that's earnest funds or any kind of credits. Seller may have been given concessions. You want to make sure those concessions show up on that final settlement statement. So depending on what was agreed upon, and then just your typical fees and costs that are associated with the closing, that's what you're going to see on that final settlement statement. So for buyers, one of the most important things is to know exactly how much money you need for closing. Now I'm going to bring up that graphic one more time. If you're looking at, let's see, on this graphic, you'll see the kind of the warning arrow with the triangle with the exclamation. Wire fraud is real. Never change wiring instructions based solely on an unexpected email, text, or phone call. Can't emphasize this enough. Wire fraud is real. Okay, so and in most cases, and again, we'll talk to our clients about our processes and procedures. We never email or send out wiring instructions because we're not handling the funds. Generally, that's your attorney and your lenders that are dealing with funds. And quite honestly, the closing attorney is typically the one that's going to send you any kind of wiring instructions. You want to verify those instructions using a trusted method and follow the attorney's procedures. Because again, when money is moving, you have to verify that money before you send it and once it gets there. So we're looking for confirmations from the lending institutions or the banking agencies, whatever it is. We're looking for those confirmations to hit. Sometimes you may be required to wire funds prior to closing, especially if it's a significant amount. You may also have to, and some attorneys may, depending on the amount, if it's a little bit less, it may not require that you wire the funds, and there may be certified checks involved. But again, talk to your closing attorney. that final settlement statement. Those are the bottom line figures. And once you look at those, you'll know exactly how much money you need to bring to the closing table. In very rare instances, you may even receive a check at closing. But again, different things have to fall into place for that to happen. Now, if you're the seller, typically sellers are getting a check or they're getting a wiring of funds at closing. Sometimes sellers do have to bring money to the closing table. When would they have to do that? Usually when it's a quick sale. So like, let's say you bought last year or 2 years ago. Well, you don't have any equity built up in the home just yet. So unfortunately, in those instances, and it's just a matter of circumstances. Sometimes a job move has happened or a family emergency. Something's come up and you have to move in a pretty quick amount of time, and there's not any equity built up. In those instances, you're pretty much going to have to bring some money to the closing table. But again, all of that will be known up front. There shouldn't be any major surprises at this part of the transaction, the closing table. So let's jump on to segment 4. When do you actually own the house? Okay. Here's one that kind of surprises some buyers. Let's say you finish signing everything. Everybody shakes hands and smiles and hugs, and you're taking your, obligatory "we bought a house" picture, and you're holding up your signs. The question is, can you move in now? The answer is not necessarily. Let's bring up that segment 4 graphic and take a look at that. When do you actually own the house? There's still some things that have to be done. So signing documents and as far as the transaction being fully completed aren't always the exact same time. The attorney still has the responsibility to complete funding. And sometimes funds, like I was just saying a few minutes ago, funds may have to be confirmed. Different documents sometimes may require wet signatures, and those things have to be sent to the attorney. So your closing attorney and your realtor can tell you when the transaction has reached the point where possession can appropriately occur based on your circumstances and the agreement. So remember, don't have that moving truck sitting outside the house just waiting. There could be delays. There could be delays, unfortunately. So just signing the papers doesn't necessarily mean you're going to instantly get those keys. There may be a waiting period even after signing. I won't say it's very rare, but it doesn't happen as often. Most of the time when these closings happen, you're pretty much done once you sign. But just be aware that's not always the case. There may be a slight delay. And again, we're waiting for these funds to hit. There are different situations and scenarios that take place. But once everything has been fully funded, the lender and whoever is involved in the transactions, once they have all the legally signed documents in hand, generally that's when those keys are handed over. Let's take a look at the final segment, segment 5. What should you bring to closing on closing day? So let's go ahead and bring that graphic up, because you don't want to come to the closing table empty-handed. You want to bring a government-issued photo ID. Remember, we talked about earlier any required funds that you may have. So if you have to bring any money to the closing table, whether you're the buyer or the seller, you want to make sure you have that. There may be specific documents. If there's a power of attorney or anything like that that's going on, make sure you have all those required documents. And knowing what to bring and what not to do helps ensure a smooth and stress-free closing experience. Please, please protect your approval. This is to the buyers. Let me come back on screen, because this can be a scary proposition sometimes. Buyers, do not buy furniture. Don't do anything crazy with your finances until you've finished the closing, okay? Because any financial moves you make right before closing without talking to your lender could really jeopardize the entire deal, okay? Don't go finance all your furniture. Just hold off on all of that. I would recommend waiting until you have keys in hand before you do any of that. So even if you're looking at furniture, or you're looking to do things, hey, please wait. It's you've come this far, getting all the way through inspections, negotiations, appraisals, and you're at the closing table, you don't want to blow it at this point. So please be disciplined, do what needs to be done. And until the transaction is finished, buyers, do not change your financial picture. Okay, please. And finally, let's take a look at one of my favorite segments, Terry's Take. And here's my take for this week's episode. Stay engaged all the way through. Verify your funds. Listen to your professionals. That's your lenders, your attorneys, your real estate agents. Protect your financing. In other words, don't make any last minute financial moves that could, create a problem or jeopardize the entire deal. Then once you've been told everything is complete, you know what? That's when it's time to go ahead and celebrate. That's when you can breathe a sigh of relief. The house is now yours. The day that you've all been waiting for, celebrate. Really celebrate. Call the family. We've had some clients where they've kept it a secret until the closing day. So pretty exciting times. And then just kind of bask in the fact that, you know what, you're going home. It's yours now. So it's something to be proud of. It's something to be excited about. Once you get to the closing table, this is what it's all about. So if you're getting ready to buy or sell a home, understanding what happens before closing day can make closing day a whole lot less stressful. Again, that's why we've created this weekly home workshop, to give you some nuggets, some things that you can use to help you through the process. You can catch previous episodes anytime. Sometimes they're on our Facebook page, also on our YouTube channel. We do have a playlist of the weekly home workshops. If this is something that has helped you out, please share it with a friend. If you have comments or questions, drop them in the comment section. It may become an episode or a topic that we'll discuss in the future. And join me on next Wednesday at 12:15 for another 15-minute workshop. And remember, don't make a move without us. We'll see you next week. Take care.